Okay, well, welcome, friends. Welcome to another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. And whether you're listening to this or watching it on YouTube, a warm welcome. I'm Dr. David. Some people know me as the Cutting Edge Doc. And here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting edge work in the areas of healing and spirituality and social transformation. In some of these shows, I'm interviewing someone that I'm very interested in getting to know better and understanding their work and making it available to you. And in other episodes, I select particular people to interview me, to draw me out on topics and ideas and projects that I think would be valuable possibly for you to know about and possibly participate with. It's kind of like a turnaround episode, and that's one of these episodes. And in this particular episode, it's called Phoenix Rising in Motion. It's going to be an extension of a conversation that was done in February of 2022 called Phoenix Rising, which you might want to take a look at as well. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit as we go on, but for the rest of the episode, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and my student, Karmjit Singh, to take it from here, and I will promise to do my very best to be of service to you. So let me turn it over to Karmjit right now. I know you'll be in really good hands.
Thank you so much, Dr. K. I'm really honored to be here with you, and thank you for this opportunity. So today, what I was thinking was, if you'd be open to give us a recap of what you shared a little bit, in the original Phoenix Rising call, and then we can kind of take it from there, if that's okay with you.
Great. And my understanding is that you've been kind enough to create a visual. And so
Yes.
if you can put that on the screen while I'm talking, I think it will be of service to people.
Absolutely. I'll do that now.
Okay, so let me give you a little background. So a little over a year ago, I had this inspiration to create this model, and then Karmjit was kind enough to create a visual of it, which I think makes it easier to understand. And this model came out of my desire to take an extremely broad set of topics and ideas and to create a mental model that allows such a broad, deep topic to be confronted by the human mind in a way that facilitates learning, so it's not so overwhelming. And so just to introduce the model and then embellish it a little bit. So we have basically here a four-sided structure, which you can imagine, even though you're only seeing two of the sides, you can imagine that there's basically a triangular base, and then you have three walls coming up to the top. And so at the top we have being, and then over on one angle we have abundance, another angle we have health and vitality, and on another angle we have skillful means, divided up into being skillful in relation to your inner world and in relation to your outer world. And the more I was just being with this model, the more I realized that it did have a lot of utility. It did have a lot of value. And so I just want to introduce the model. And basically, in my experience, people that are having the greatest quality of life, people who are have the greatest effectiveness in their life as being an uplifter, for example, they tend to have a high level of facility and mastery in relation to the the things that are pointed to in this model. So starting at the top is they tend to have an awareness not only of maybe things that most people are aware of, their opinions, their feelings, the things they're seeing in the physical world, their desires, but they seem to also have an awareness and at least moving in the direction of having a greater mastery in relation to being, what it is that they're being. Most people are not very aware of what they're being because they've been being whatever they've been being for so long that they take it for granted. You know, for example, somebody could be being that good things in life are scarce, or someone could be being that there's not enough good stuff to go around, or people could be being that I'm all alone, or I'm not enough, or life is tough, or I'm too old, or I'm too young, or life has passed me by, or all sorts of things that they're being that it's like a tint on a pair of glasses that colors everything that you see. But if you've had those glasses on for so long, you don't realize that what you're seeing is being distorted by the particular color of the lens. And so mastery of being has to do with more awareness of these lenses, and then eventually having a facility of being able to take lenses off, try new ones on, maybe be willing to take all of them off for a while, and to see what you see, and to be experimenting with different ways of being that seem to work best in terms of whatever it is that you're wanting to accomplish or be or sense or feel. And so that is one area that I found that is very important in terms of life mastery. Another thing that I found is that, for lack of a better word, let's call them peak performers, but I'm also including quality of life here. Other thing that I've noticed is that these people tend to have a particular orientation and understanding of abundance. Not relating it in particularly to money, although it can include money. And so I came up with the definition of abundance that I think has been very helpful for myself and a lot of other people. And that has two parts. One is timely access to appropriate resources, both internal and external. And then also a commitment to being a better and better steward in the application of those internal and external resources. And so that way of looking at abundance or being with abundance opens up a lot of possibilities that if you are being that things are scarce, or you're being that abundance equals money, or something like that, can really limit your experience. And so that's another area that seems to be really valuable if you're wanting to create something new that isn't just an extension of the past, either for yourself personally or to contribute to some new collective possibility as well. And so then we get to the angle of health and vitality. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. A few comments here. One is that many people, like if you go up to most people and say, how are you doing? They say, I'm fine. But what do they mean by that? What they mean is that they're not in extreme pain right now, or they're not having any extreme obvious dysfunction relative to what society considers normal. But that's not what I mean by health and vitality. I mean health being sort of an ongoing, expanding expression of balance and vitality on multiple levels: physical, sexual, emotional, mental, spiritual, social, intellectual. etc. So it's an orientation that isn't defined by the negative. It's a positive orientation to health and vitality, and a commitment to an ongoing journey of expanding health and vitality. Obviously, that has an enormous impact on the quality of your life, your energy level, your perceptions, what you believe is possible. That's an enormous area. And then skillful means. So what I noticed in myself and others is that people who tend to have the greatest quality of life and effectiveness in life, they have a particular orientation to their inner world. Instead of trying to overcome it or deny it or justify it or rationalize it, whether they've done this consciously or unconsciously, somehow through life, they've developed a way to be with the contents of their consciousness in such a way that it doesn't stop them. They're not giving their power away to their thoughts. They're not giving their power away to their feelings. They're not giving their power away to their moods, either by indulging them or by trying to fight them. And this is a very tricky thing for people that are stuck in an ego-based perspective, because that's about the only options that you have from the ego-based perspective is to agree with it, indulge it, or to try to push it away. And neither of those things work very well with regard to being skillful in relation to your inner world. It turns out that what works a lot better is expanding your willingness and ability to be aware of those things and let them be. And what happens is this miracle thing happens where if you can let them be, they'll let you be. And then you recover your capacity for free will and freedom of choice. And then, of course, there's skillful means in the outer world, or what some people might call street smarts. You know, there's just things you learn if you pay attention about how to negotiate your world as it currently is at a cultural level, at a community level. You know, there's lots of ways to, plus there's skills that you develop with other people, right? Like there's communication skills, there's negotiation skills, there's understanding what your legal rights are, there's just learning about the world and understanding how to negotiate the world in a way that doesn't entangle you, but allows you to move as freely as possible towards your purposes in a way that kind of greases the wheels, so to speak, so that your life's not so squeaky and your life isn't about all the wasted time and energy that comes from maybe having a lack of wisdom or street smarts with regard to all the aspects of being effective in life. And so in the conversation we had back in February of 2022, I introduced this model and got into its implications in a little more depth. And you know, some people are able to take a conversation like that, and they're able to, you know, what the Course in Miracles calls transfer of knowledge. They're able to take a principle or an abstraction, and they're able to own it, and they're able to relate it to all the different existential realities in their life. But most people can't do that without some help. They need clarifications of definitions of words. They need examples. They need stories. They need deeper questioning that guides where they're taking a look at that particular subject matter. And so I'm aware of that. And especially in today's world with the chronic stress that most people are under, it's less likely that people will do that on their own. And so I'm being moved today to see if I can facilitate that process of helping people to own these distinctions in a way where it's not just a concept that's in their mind, but it's something that they're living, that they can live these distinctions. They can live from these distinctions rather than looking at these distinctions. They can live from them and then see what they see. And then they're able to be empowered so that these distinctions can work through you as a human being, in you, through you, as you, so that you start spontaneously showing up in a different way. And so today is an initial attempt to facilitate that process. And, someone like myself that's kind of a practical visionary type person, sometimes I can be so close to my work where I'm just living it. So it's like no big deal for me. And that can make it a little more challenging to build the bridge that needs to be built to where many people are. And so Karmjit is really great at having a pretty good understanding of what I'm talking about, and also having their pulse on the collective, maybe in a way that isn't as easy for me. So here we are.
Thank you so much for sharing all that, Dr. K. So let's dive in. So as I was contemplating, our call here, I started doing some more research on Phoenix Rising. And one of the things that I came across was this, where many places they associated Phoenix with strength, with resilience, with persistence, perseverance. And one thought that came to me was, the idea of Phoenix Rising seems really exciting, but what if you're somebody who is so stuck in their scarcity mindset, their unworthiness, that being a Phoenix, it's a bit out of reach? Could we start there? Could you just share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, let me expand on what you're suggesting and pan back even bigger, because I think it will help. So part of the myth of the Phoenix that you didn't mention, that some people might not know, is that the Phoenix is this bird, this majestic bird that rises from the ashes. And so I think we need to talk about the ashes first, because it's one's relationship to the ashes. It's the transformation of one's relationship to the ashes that opens up the possibility of the Phoenix rising. So what do the ashes represent? The ashes are sort of the product of a massive breakdown of all sorts of structures that reflect and extend and express ways of being and doing things and having things, and ideas and practices that in reality no longer are effective. And so let's apply it to cultures, first of all. So cultures rise and fall. We know that historically. And what's that all about? So a culture rises when there's new ideas, energies, ways of being, doing things, practices that make the quality of life for most people better, and they're more effective. And then when all these things stop doing that, and people don't know how to adapt, if the culture can't adapt, then it crumbles and there are ashes. And the same thing happens with personal belief structures too. You have a way of being and believing things and doing things, and they get you to a certain point, which is great. But here's the thing. If you're being that way of being is the only way of being, like a fish in the water doesn't know it's in the water, doesn't know there's anything outside of water, it doesn't know that water can be, that there are different qualities of water, it doesn't know any of that. And so if you're being a certain way that got you to a certain point, especially if you've had some success with it, and you're being, but you don't know you're being, that's the only way to be, But that way of being isn't allowing you to continue to grow. You're not going to realize that it's your way of being that's limiting you. You're going to be thinking things like, well, how can I do what I'm doing more? Or how can I do what I'm doing differently? Or how can I do what I'm doing better? It won't occur to you that it's possible that the limiting factor is an entire way of being that you identified with because it, at best, allowed you to succeed. And maybe at worst, you identified with being a failure, whatever. Anyway, and so there's an old Taoist saying that nothing fails quite like success. In other words, if this way of being got us all this success, and we don't know that that's just one way of being, it's going to keep us from growing. And so it's important, if you want to understand the myth of the phoenix, to understand what the ashes are representing, right? And so the phoenix can only rise for you when you have a certain orientation toward the ashes. In other words, if you are the ashes, you're in trouble. or if you have no idea what the ashes are representing or what they're coming from, and you can't have a powerful relationship with the ashes, you're not going to have a powerful relationship with the phoenix. And so what's unique about, in 2023, in this early spring here where we're recording, is that the breadth and depth and magnitude of the breakdown of the major institutions of our culture are reaching a feverish peak. And because so many people's sense of themselves and well-being and power has been given away to these institutions and structures and ideas that correlate with them and ways of being, that people are frightened, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're under chronic stress, their bodies are under attack as well. And so if we're in denial about all of that, if we are trying to make things more, better, different, but not realizing that maybe the limiting factor is a way of being that we're not even aware of, we're just going to get even more burnt out. And so what I would say to people that are so lost that they don't know that they're lost is to consider the possibility that what I'm saying might be accurate. Because if you're stuck in those ways of being and you don't know you're stuck in those ways of being, the way to begin to be free of that is to open up to the possibility that maybe you're stuck in those ways of being and you don't even know it. And then the next step would be to accept yourself and what it is that you see and feel when you look at yourself and you look at life from that possibility. But that's the last thing the ego would ever think of doing.
So, Dr. K, on that, the ashes. So one of the things I was wondering was the phoenix dies, and then we have the ashes, then there's the rebirth, right? However, with us,
it's not so much that the phoenix dies in the myth, but it's the phoenix rising from the ashes that's the key to the myth. It doesn't matter if it's the phoenix or whatever, but the key to the myth is that there's been massive breakdown, and out of that massive breakdown, all the energy that's been stuck in all of those structures and all those limited identities now are broken down into more fundamental particles and can be rearranged and repurposed and reprioritized if you are in a state of being where you have access to the possibility of that. But most people are, because of what I just said for the last 5 minutes, most people don't have practical access to the phoenix that is rising. And so it's not that you have to create a phoenix rising. It's that you need to remove the blockages to your natural awareness and participation in Phoenix Rising. The key idea here, or at least the key idea that's relevant to this model, is that the crisis of this massive breakdown, everything from ways of being, ways of thinking, ways of handling money, ways of handling healthcare, ways of doing relationships, ways of handling education, it's all breaking down because all of these things were potential solutions to ideas that were ego-based. And there's nothing wrong with ego-based ideas. I mean, if it weren't for ego-based ideas, I wouldn't have a washer and dryer. You know, so there's nothing wrong with ego-based ideas, but where ego-based ideas and ego-based ways of being become limiting is when you're being without knowing that you're being, that being ego-based is the only possibility of being for human beings. You see, and so because being is something that hasn't been studied by most people, it wouldn't occur to most people that maybe that what's limiting them is an entire way of being to which they are blind. And so there's a certain humility that needs to happen where you begin to have the possibility of doubting what you took for granted in the past as just life. Well, maybe it's not life. Maybe it's just how life occurs within an ego-based frame of reference. And you see, if you were born into a culture, into a family, if the water you were born into was an ego-based state of consciousness, and you have no frame of reference like the fish does to the water, you're likely going to conclude without knowing that you're concluding that ego-based way of being and perceiving is life, and that who you are is ego-based, but you don't know that it's ego-based because you don't even have the frame of reference to have the word ego-based frame of reference. And so there's a blindness there. It's not just an ignorance, but it's a blindness. And to have the humility to entertain the possibility that there's something you don't know, the knowing of which could allow for the possibility of a quantum leap, or could allow for the possibility of Phoenix rising, then the odds of Phoenix rising in a way that feel that you can participate in a joyous way is very limited, low. The odds of that are very low. The odds of it is that you're going to experience falling apart because your ego identification with all the structures and ways of being and doing things that are falling apart is your experience, is your perception. And what happens is when people experience that pain, then they compound it by trying to resist it or overcome it or push it away or deny it or justify it or rationalize it. So you get in this downward spiral that many people are in these days.
And so if you are in that situation and there is that breakdown, what do you do besides trying to fix it and trying to make it better?
Well, I thought I mentioned that.
Could you please?
I will say it again.
Yeah.
Is to open up to the possibility that it's completely hopeless, that there's nothing you can do within that frame of ego-based consciousness that will work. And then when you realize that it's really hopeless, and you're not just saying that so you can get past it, but when you realize it really is hopeless, that I'm not just yakking here, but I'm pointing at something that has validity, and you go through your shocking moment, you know, figuratively, you're brought to your knees, right? You realize that within ego-based consciousness, you don't have the power. You don't have access to the power. to handle this. And then people, sometimes they'll kill themselves or they'll call out to God for help. And that can be a really good first step, because calling out to God for help can be an expression of humility. That there's something beyond my current sense of self that maybe can be in the picture. And that's a really good first step, but it's not a good final step, because when people call out to God, 99.9% of people are calling out to God from a perspective of, I'm here, God's over there. But at least it's a start. You know, that's why when people start the 12-step program, that's why in the beginning, the first 2 or 3 years, they tend to make a lot of progress, because they're admitting their helplessness. They're admitting they have no power. But you see, that's a useful tool in the beginning of the 12-step program, because people are identified with ego-based consciousness. So when they say, I'm powerless, that's a form of humility. But many people, after 2 or 3 years in doing 12-step programs, they get stuck and they don't know why they're stuck. And so they think they just have to do more, better, different. But a lot of times what's going on is that model of that they're powerless has taken them as far as they can. And it's time to let go of that model, because that model now is not workable for you anymore. That model was a training wheel on the bicycle, but you didn't know it was a training wheel that you could take off. You thought it was part of the bicycle that was inherent to bicycles. But you don't have, you're not thinking that. You're not thinking, oh, that was a useful tool. Now I'm going to take off the training wheel. And so people make up all sorts of stories. Well, I'm just not working my program well enough. I'm just not trying hard enough. I'm just not talking to my sponsor enough. Blah, 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 blah. When maybe that's it, but maybe that's not it. Maybe you've just outgrown the training wheel of, oh, I'm powerless, I'm an alcoholic. Well, maybe that was useful at the time, but maybe now it's limiting you. Maybe you're not really powerless. Maybe you're not really an alcoholic. But you didn't have a way of being with that model of the 12-step that kept you from giving your power away to the model.
That's really powerful. And it makes me want to go back even a second to make sure that we're fully tracking with you. You talked some about being, okay? I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with you. Like, how do you experience being? Like, what is being?
Well, like, you could be being that for you to win, someone has to lose, without ever consciously having that thought. That could be part of the water you were thrown into. And then your entire existence, you're looking through a lens that you don't know you're looking through. And the lens called, if someone wins, someone has to lose. And your whole life is being experienced through that lens. And that's going to have an enormous impact on you without you ever necessarily knowing that. Like, for example, you might feel guilty about winning and never know why. You might limit your creativity because there's no room for win-win solutions. But you might never know why. You might go see a therapist and work on your self-esteem till the cows come home. It won't work if the limiting factor is that you're being that for someone to win, someone has to lose.
And you said that you may not even have a thought about that.
Right? You may never have had a conscious awareness of ever having that thought. You had the thought, but you may be completely unconscious, especially if it happened when you were young. You might be completely unconscious that you ever had that thought, or maybe Before you even had language, you didn't have that thought, but that way of being was modeled to you by your caretakers, and you imbibe that in a pre-verbal imprint energetically, and you have no way of knowing that.
And so how, I want to make sure I understand in that, you also follow sports and you really like sports, and somebody does win, somebody does lose. How do you relate that to what we're talking about here?
That is such a great question. And I send me a bill for that one. That is such a great question, because that opens up a discussion that I hadn't thought of opening up, but I realize now when you said it, that it's a brilliant conversation to open up right now. And that's the distinction between infinite games and finite games. I'm going to say that again because I know I'm yakking a lot, but that one was really important. There's a distinction between infinite games and finite games. And in order to have a full human life, you need to have a powerful relationship in relation to both infinite games and finite games. And you have to have a wise understanding of the relationship between infinite games and finite games. So finite games can be very valuable if they're being played in the context of playing an infinite game. So I'll give you an example. Let's take two golfers. Let's call the first golfer John, and let's call the second golfer Sam. And they're in the same golf tournament. And there can only be one winner in the golf tournament, right? Only one first prize, okay? And let's say John is playing the finite game of winning the golf tournament to his absolute best, all right? And he does his absolute best and he comes in fourth place. But John's playing an infinite game. John's playing the game of committed to ongoing excellence.
Sam is.
No,
So
John
is playing the finite game, isn't he?
There's not one or the other. So John is in the golf tournament doing his very, very best. And John comes in fourth place. But John is also,
okay.
That could be the most important thing of the whole day. Also playing an infinite game of ongoing growth, ongoing learning. Now let's take Sam. Sam is playing the same golf tournament. He's doing his best. He's playing to win. And he wins the tournament. He wins the finite game, but he's not playing the infinite game. He's playing the game called, I want to win the tournament so my father will approve of me. There you go. So John's playing the infinite game, and within the infinite game, he's playing this finite game called winning the golf tournament. But because he's playing the finite game was in the context of the infinite game, the impact of him playing the finite game is completely different on John than it is on Sam. Because Sam is locked into finite games only. Guess what? Ego-based consciousness is locked into finite games. In fact, ego has no structural capacity, no matter how hard it tries, to ever know the infinite game. Because it's a complex mental construct, which is finite. And so the question is, what are you being? Are you being an infinite being who also plays finite games? Or are you being that you're finite? And I'll tell you, if you were born into Western culture and you haven't met a weird person like me, chances are very, 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 very high that you're being without knowing you're being this, that you are finite. And that infinite God either doesn't exist or infinite God is over there. And so that's the water, listen, that's the water we're in. We're in that, well, either there's only finite games, or if there is an infinite game, it's over there. And then someone weird like me comes along and says, wait a minute, what if that's not true? What if it's more like this? And you're going, but John was playing a finite game. But now you're saying he's playing an infinite game. Oh no, I'm going on tilt. Well, that's ego-based consciousness. That's what happens to ego-based consciousness. It goes on tilt. And then it's so arrogant that it either just denies infinity and goes, well, I'm a scientist, I can't measure infinity, so it must not be real. Or it just sandbags it and goes, well, that's not a valid topic for scientific inquiry. We'll leave that to the priests and we'll leave that to the poets. Well, that's like saying God is over there. So you're left with this tragic view of human being and this tragic view of life where you're this finite thing interacting with other potentially finite things, fighting for scarce resources. And so it's better, I can justify being violent to you because otherwise you'll be violent to me. And if you look at human history over the last few thousand years, we pretty much described it. When you want to spend your life doing that more, better, different, go right ahead, but just don't get it on me. That's not why I'm here. I'm not here to explore new permutations of that option. I'm here to stand for the possibility of a new possibility of being for human beings, where it's not infinite or finite, but it's the infinite expressing through the unique fractal of your soul that's currently incarnated in a physical body as either a male or female on the surface of planet Earth in this time-space coordinate. I'm standing for that possibility. And that's challenging because, first of all, there's little agreement for that. And secondly, if you do stand for that, what you will begin to see on one hand are these new possibilities, but the other thing you're going to begin to see, and it's very humbling, is to see all your old ways of being and doing and having and all that, that's a reflection of this other way of being that only could get you so far. And so then the question comes up, well, how do you be with those ashes? And it's how you be with those ashes that separates, so to speak, the men from the boys on the spiritual path. Because many people get this initial inspiration of possibility. You know, like you could be hanging out with me and you could have that initial sense of possibility, you know. But what happens when you go to Kmart and you see 99% of the things on the shelf being toxic to human beings? What do you do then? What are you being then? What are you thinking then? What are you feeling then? That's where the rubber meets the road. Do you just go into an oppositional stance to that? Or do you have a way of being with that where the ashes can make a contribution to the phoenix?
So in that particular example of Kmart, would it be like, obviously there could be infinite number of options, but would one option, if you were playing the infinite and the finite game, be to come up with other ways to provide those products that are not toxic to people? Is that an example of what you're sharing or what you're going?
It depends. If you're doing it as a way of trying to push, if you're doing it to resist what you're seeing, it'll be more of the problem. But if you're doing it out of your love of the new possibility, it can be part of the phoenix. So if you're fixated on the what, you'll never have a complete answer, because there's also the why. What's your purpose? You know, the road to hell can be paved with really good intentions. I mean, look at most activists. They're not happy campers. You wouldn't want to invite most of them over for dinner. You wouldn't want most of them to be taking care of your kids.
So,
and there's nothing wrong with activism, but most activism comes from resisting what is. And there's no way around it. What you resist persists. There's no way around it. There is no way around that universal law. What you resist persists. Otherwise, you wouldn't keep resisting it, because it wouldn't be persisting. So what you resist persists. If I told you, you're a completely free person, but you only have to do one thing for me for the next 24 hours. Make sure that you never think of a pink elephant. You would be the most unfree person in the world, because you'd have to think of pink elephants to try not to think of pink elephants, and your life would be dominated by pink elephants, thinking that you want to get away from it. And that's literally what's happening for most people. Their life is just filled with all these pink elephants that they're committed to avoiding. And so they're using the law of attraction against them. And they don't even know it. And then the more the emotion they have around it, the worse it gets. You know, I have to push this Kmart food away. No, just change the channel. It's like watching, it's like watching, it's like you've got your TV set in front of you, you've got your remote control, you've got your 100 channels. And it's like there's this program that is about how great all this toxic food is for you and how healthy it is. And instead of just saying, well, this doesn't resonate with me, I'm going to change the channel, you go, oh, I'm going to spend my whole life on that channel. Oh, I'm not going to look at other channels. Oh, I have to get rid of that channel. Oh, if I don't get rid of that channel's going to come out of the television set, it's going to bite me. No, that's not the way reality works. People have a right to go into Kmart. People have a right to buy that food. People have a right. Maybe for some people, that's a lot better than starving. And maybe some people are vibrating at a level where that food actually feels pretty good to them. You don't know. You know, maybe half those people, if they had wheatgrass juice, they'd throw it up. You don't know. You just know it doesn't resonate for you. And that's enough. You don't have to justify your existence. You don't have to prove that you're right. Only ego would do that. You are. You don't have to justify that you are. You have things resonate with you and things don't. That's just the way it is. You don't have to like, well, I'm right. I'm right. You're wrong. No, that's ego-based.
So Dr. K, would you clarify what is an infinite game? What is a finite game? Yeah, because we all have different vocabularies.
Well, it's just the definition of infinite and finite.
Okay, so what is finite to you? Is it that it has a beginning, it has an end, you can see it with your senses? Like, how do you
finite
experience that versus
finite means that something had a beginning and a middle, and it will have an end.
Okay, and so when we're playing finite games, there's a beginning, middle, and end. So this,
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with finite games. They're fantastic. But if you give your power away to the finite game, thinking that that's going to make you happy, that winning that game will make you happy, or that if you win that game, someone has to lose. If you infect the playing of the infinite game with limited ideas, it will backfire on you. And one of the most limiting ideas when you're playing an infinite game is that there are only infinite games. There are only, finite games. One of the most limiting ways of being with finite games is that there are only finite games. Because guess what? If there are only finite games, then you are a finite game.
And so there is in one respect, in this lifetime, right, there is a beginning, middle, and an end. So
to this body.
Yes.
To this body. But if then you're saying you are your body.
Right.
If you say I am finite, then you're saying I am my body.
Right.
Yeah, you cannot have an empowering relationship with your body if you are that you are your body.
And so could you describe how to be?
I don't think I can.
So I want to make sure that we're understanding the infinite game. Okay, like what is the infinite game?
Something that had no beginning, no middle, and no end. It can have qualities, but qualities can be expanded forever. It's a difference between a line segment and a vector. A vector has a direction, but it goes on forever. So you could have a quality like of courage. And that could be an aspect of pure being, of infinite being. And that quality cannot be measured quantitatively. There's no limit to courage. And in that sense, it's an expression of infinity. It can go on forever, or growth, or learning, or love can go on forever. Consciousness, awareness can go on forever.
So those same things can also be finite, right? Courage, learning, love.
No, it cannot. It cannot. It cannot. Your expression of them can come and go. But these are fundamental qualities of being that where there's absolutely no limit. You can never, a good example is going east. I can be standing completely east right now, but there's an infinity of east for me to go. There's no end to east. There's no end to it. But if I say I have a goal to go from San Francisco to Denver, that's a finite game. There's nothing wrong with playing finite games, but why are you playing them? And are you being that you're finite? And are you being that if you win that finite game, you're going to be happy now?
So, for example, going back to John and Sam, how would their experiences be different? So
you tell me.
Well, so
you tell me. Imagine being John, playing the infinite game of ongoing expansion and improvement. And he comes in fourth place and he knows he did his best and he really focused on what worked and what didn't work. And he was really committed to using that as feedback and improving. And he was really grateful for the opportunity to challenge himself and play against the best players. What's his life experience going to be like compared to the person who was playing out of fear that if they didn't win, that they would never get their father's approval? And now they win, and now they feel great for 30 minutes. And then their father calls him up and goes, "Good job, son," or he doesn't call him up. So what? So what? Do you think Do you think his angst is coming from, is going to be assuaged by something from outside of himself? No. No, he's going to suffer. He's going to keep suffering. Even though he won the finite game, he's going to, just like he was suffering while he was playing the game, he's going to suffer after the game, because the finite game doesn't have the power to produce true satisfaction. It can be an arena in which you can express the satisfaction that you infinitely are. But if you're trying to get the satisfaction from the finite game, don't hold your breath. Let's go back to the first commandment. Thou shalt put no false gods before God. Well, what did Sam put as a false god? Winning the tournament, getting approval from his father. So he'd given his power away to the finite game. He'd given his power away to words that his father might utter to him. That person is suffering no matter what is happening. He might be in denial about his suffering, but he is suffering. This isn't rocket science to see that if you're just willing to look. You can see that he is suffering.
Yes, I can see that he's suffering, and I feel a lot of compassion for Sam, who is suffering. And
Sure.
yeah, and so now I'm wondering if it would be useful to bring it back to Phoenix Rising. Okay, so how?
So Sam would need to begin to open up to the possibility that he's trying to get something from the golf tournament that is impossible. He's trying to get something from his father that's impossible. And that maybe there are other ways of him having what he's really after without needing to manipulate who wins the golf tournament and without needing to get his father to say certain words. I mean, my answer to you is always the same. I just don't know how many times I need to say it, but my answer is always the same. So you might want to talk about why it's hard for you, why you're asking me the same question in different ways over and over and over again. What's that all about?
Well, I think what all that is about is there is an awareness of what I'm being, but at the same time, there's also patterns of scarcity and, you know, the things that go that are associated with that somehow pull me out, and then I'm being something different, and it ends up happening where this is more present for me. And so that's where the questions come from, because there's, you know, I feel like it's important to look at it from so many different ways, because my mind also goes to this or that, you know, not this and that, you know, I kind of forget that.
Maybe what's there for you to see is that you have been entangled, you've agreed with a scarcity either or worldview. And maybe the most valuable thing you could do is compassionately begin to doubt whether that worldview, not is it right or is it wrong, but is that worldview allow for the possibility for you to be what you want to be and do what you want to do, have what you want to have, share what you want to share. And maybe you're not that worldview. Maybe you have that worldview. Maybe if you weren't concerned about justifying that worldview and proving that you were right, I mean, big fucking deal, you're right. You wanted to say on your tombstone, I'm right? Yeah, that's what the ego wants. Or the ego wants, avoided being wrong. Well, big fucking deal. I'll come to your funeral and say, you know, I did my best with her. You know, so it's like, do you really want that? Is that really what you're after? No, that's like thinking, if you were Sam, that's like thinking that what you really wanted was, you really wanted to get your dad's approval. Big fucking deal. You wanted to say on his tombstone, finally got my dad's approval. Well, fuck, so what? So what? Your well-being now is dependent on this other human being uttering a few words to you? What are you doing? What have you done? Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. I'm saying, look at what you've been being. Look at the game you've been playing. Accept that that's what you've been playing. Accept yourself in the moment of seeing it. Own it. Forgive yourself. Forgive others. Give others permission to forgive you. Be grateful for seeing it. Be grateful for seeing it. Not as a threat. Be grateful for seeing it. Thank God I'm seeing it. It's an answer to my prayer. Even if it stings a little to hear it, it's an answer to my prayer.
So I do see it and I'm grateful for it. And at the same time, when I catch myself at moments, I'm not so happy with myself for having done it again, once again,
That because you go into judgment. You go into a thought like, well, I shouldn't have gotten lost again. Okay, I'll make a t-shirt for you, the Should Queen. How do you know? How do you know you shouldn't have made that mistake again? That's just your inner critic going, I shouldn't have made that mistake again.
Wait, okay, so pause for a second. What do you mean? How do I know that I shouldn't have done it again? So
in other words, you're judging yourself. You're saying, I shouldn't have done it again. I should have learned it the first time. Why am I doing it again? There I'm doing it again. Oh, shit. And instead of accepting that you got your hand caught in the cookie jar again, instead of having compassion for yourself and realizing that you're attempting to free yourself from a pattern that you've done 87 million times, you're like wanting to be Paula Perfect. And instead of enjoying the journey. Well, the journey shouldn't include so many hands in the cookie jar moments. How do you know? Maybe it's absolutely perfect that out of your commitment to stand for this new possibility of this abundant and world, maybe it's totally appropriate and perfect and graceful that you catch yourself 2,700 times over the next 6 weeks being caught in either or consciousness, because every time you catch yourself in it and have compassion, you're that much freer from it. You have this thought, I shouldn't have done it again. And instead of you going, oh, that's just another thought, you think it's true. It's true. You're being, I shouldn't have done it again. And you suffer and you're upset. And the ego loves it because there's friction.
So, you're right. So I do know that it's a thought. I recognize it's a thought. I recognize that I have these belief systems. And at the same time, I have that judgment that I shouldn't have done it.
Right. But that doesn't occur to you as a thought.
No, that doesn't occur to me as a thought. But the rest of it does.
But that's where you get stuck, is the thought that didn't occur to you as a thought. That's why they pay me the big bucks, because I can help you see the back of your head. Like it might take you 5 lifetimes on your own to realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that. It's just another thought. right? But then you meet a weird person like me and I go, did you notice that's just another thought? You go, no. Well, who knows? Maybe that just saved you 5 lifetimes of suffering. Who knows? But until you see how you create your own suffering, the possibility of stopping doing that is really low, really low, really, 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 really low. That's why the ashes are valuable. Because we can be with the ashes and we can see very clearly what we're being and doing that isn't working.
Since we're running short on time, can we come back to your model?
Sure,
And
or if you know, if you want to take the conversation in a different direction and do a completely, you know, different video another time, that's fine. Whatever you, and I don't want you to feel like you're at the effect of time. Whatever you feel like where do you think, you know, where do you think things are naturally wanting to go from here?
well, you know, the individuals who would be listening, it would be great, I think, if there was a little bit more things that you could share around the model. So for example, you could take my situation as an example of, so because you work with healers to help them heal so they can do the work that they want to do. You work with teachers who want to teach so they can be better teachers. So how could people begin to use your model just on a day-to-day to become more aware of what they're doing, what they're being?
So you want to stick with the being level, the being angle of the model?
Well,
It
no,
sounds
I
like
was kind of thinking the whole thing. It seems like it's all related. Like, for example,
it
the
is, but we
skill,
have to eat the elephant one bite at a time
yeah.
here
So
because
skillful means,
it's so
so
big. Okay, so skillful means, so again, we could talk for months on skillful means, right? So remember I said skillful means that being skillful in relation to your inner world, which we were just talking about. The example of that would be the realization that the thought, I shouldn't have done that again, is just a thought. That would be an example of skillful means in relation to one component of your inner world, which is your thoughts. So that's a really good example of skillful means in relation to your relationship to the contents of your inner world. Like, if a thought doesn't occur to you as a thought, but it occurs to you as reality, you will never question it. You won't. You'll just act, you just react to it. You'll react to it like it's real, like the sun is in the sky. You'll react to it the same way. Like you won't question it because, yeah, the sun's in the sky. Why are you bothering me? Why are we talking about this? So, yeah, so if it doesn't occur to you that it's a thought that it shouldn't be that way, and maybe, you know, you don't question that thought, like, how do I know it shouldn't be that way? On what basis? You know, like you inquire into the thought, like, is it really true? Like, how do I know it shouldn't be that way? Am I certain it shouldn't be that? How am I, why am I certain? You know, you know, who taught me that it shouldn't be that way? What if it's okay that it's that way? Now that's inquiry. And we're not in the habit of inquiring because part of ego-based consciousness is to try to move away from things that are painful, right? We experience pain, and then we conclude that the cause of the pain is something outside of us, and then we try to move away from it. And so most of the time, in the long run, that's not going to work. You know, so instead of trying to push away the thought, instead, like you have the thought it shouldn't be that way, but you don't know that you're having that thought. You really are that it shouldn't be that way. And then you start to get frustrated and depressed and sad. And then you try to push away that frustration and sadness and try to force yourself to keep going. You know, it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you're violating, you're using a law of the universe against yourself. You're using the law of what you resist persists. And so that would be an example of skillful means in relation to your inner world. Okay. Now let's do an example of skillful means in relation to your outer world. Okay. Okay. So let's say that you're considering making a financial investment. Okay. So it might not be the most skillful thing to do the next time you go down to the local watering hole and you're with your buddies to ask them, what stock do you think I should buy? That may not be the most skillful thing to do because they may have no evidence, they may have no track record of being an excellent stock picker. And even if they did have an excellent track record of being a good stock picker, are they aware of the changing financial system? But people do that. I'm not giving you a fantasy. People do shit like that. People ask people's opinions about things that there's very flimsy evidence for their expertise or qualifications in that area. I know people that will watch infomercials about a particular product to buy, and they'll buy it. They'll just buy it. And maybe that's not the way to do it if you really want it to work. Why do people do that, right? You know, people act stupid, you know, and they have different motivations for doing that. But anyway, skills are part of skillful means, like communication skills with other human beings, being able to create a connection with someone, being able to help someone to feel safer, to be more open to what you have to say, to being able to generate offers, to be able to lovingly accept offers, to be able to lovingly decline offers, to be able to negotiate, to be able to agree to disagree, to be able to question someone's premises of their viewpoint, right? Or if someone wanted to become a better golfer, for example, one person might borrow somebody's clubs and just go out to the driving range and try to hit the ball. And they'll probably last about 10 minutes. And they'll probably say, well, golf's too hard. It's just not for me. It's a stupid game, blah, 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 blah. Or someone else would have respect for the game. And they would go, let me do a little bit of research about the game of golf. Let me find out who is a really good golf teacher, and have they done some writing? Are there some videos I could watch? You know, because they have respect for the game and they have respect for themselves, right? So there's ways of doing life. There's ways of doing life that tend to work better than others. You know, some people will have intercourse with someone on the first date before they really know them, before they really have any way of knowing whether they want to share that intimately with that person. Is there an affinity level multidimensionally such that having sexual intercourse would be a natural expression of that connection and that honor and that admiration and that respect and that desire to know each other more deeply and to share? You know, 99.99999% of the time, if you have sexual intercourse with somebody on the first date, that's not what it's about. And most of the time, it'll destroy the relationship. So that's not a very skillful thing to do if what you're after is real connection and real relationship. And maybe there are other skills that you can develop that actually do tend to promote intimacy, safety, trust, finding out compatibility, experimenting with how your energies begin to blend. Those are all skills that might make your life with regard to intimate relationships work a lot better. So there's an infinite application of skillful means, both in the inner world and in the outer world. But the skillful means can end up backfiring on you without the understanding of what we talked about earlier, about the simultaneity of infinite and finite games. Because even the golfer who approaches it in the way I'm recommending would still suffer if that golfer was Sam. That's why skillful means is only one of the angles. How was that?
That was very useful. And as I'm being with the model, I'm noticing that depending on where a person is, in that given moment, you can actually probably start anywhere on the model to get some perspective.
Yes, because all roads lead to Rome. When you have a model that's an expression of something that is fundamental, that is real, it's holographic in its nature, and therefore you can start anywhere.
And I'm also noticing that, so for example, it might be easier for me to notice, hey, what am I thinking in the moment? Or what am I feeling? So I'm thinking, I believe that would be in the area of skillful means, right? My inner world. But at the same time, I could begin to notice, hey, my sensations, which I'm assuming, like if I've eaten, the example that sometimes you give me is like, okay, if I drink a Diet Coke, okay, no matter what, it's going to go through my system. So that's also going to impact.
Yeah, that's part of your inner world, is to be aware of your body sensations, right? And then that might relate to skillful means in the outer world, where you might decide you want to do some research about the ingredients that McDonald's uses and what their cooking methods are and how long they leave their food out before they throw it out and how that relates to bacteriology. And you might want to do some research about other types of food and other ways of preparing it and eating, and that tend to work better. You might want to do some research about cultures that tend to be healthier than our culture, and what are they being and doing and having that's different than what our culture is being and doing and having. And you might need some research skills, or you might need to know how to use the internet, or you might need to get better at asking insightful questions. Those are all skillful means in the outer world. But again, if you're doing those things because you think that'll make you happy, because nothing will make you happy. No thing will make you happy. Nothing. Jesus talked about the peace that passeth all understanding. Okay, you could substitute the word joy. The joy that passeth all understanding. In other words, no thing will make you joyous. Joy is an essential quality of being that you bring to the party. And then there are certain, life will present you with different connections at the party. And you'll notice that some of those connections have a stronger resonance for you than others. And part of your covenant with your creator is to notice what connections in life really light you up and which ones don't, and to have the faith and the consciousness to further investigate the connections that light you up.
So on that, I want to ask you a question. So how do you tell the difference between a healthy emotion, what you're being moved towards, versus instinctual, or or it might be not necessarily coming from, could be out of habit, or whatever.
Yeah, I get your question, and it's a great one. And I'll give you the answer that in my experience works best for me, but it may not work best for others because they might not have an experiential relationship with the word I'm going to use. So I'm going to start there, and if you think that didn't work, I'll keep going. So the difference between a reactive emotion and the kind of energy I'm talking about when I say notice what lights you up is, number one, it's beyond thought. Like if I say, did it light you up? And you go, I think so, I'll go, no. That's one answer. If you have to think about it, that's not it. It happens instantaneously. It happens way faster than the speed of thought. Way faster. Anyway, way faster than the speed of a reactive thought through the nervous system. Anyway, the other distinction is that when you're present, when something lights you up, there's a quality of presence that exists in that moment that doesn't exist in those reactive emotions, in those reactive thoughts. It's like life is really present. It's like, and another way of saying that it's beyond thought, and maybe this will, I'm just trying different things to see what works. So here's a third way of looking at it, is in those moments when you're lit up, when you notice that opening, the you that you usually identify yourself with isn't there. The ego-based you in that moment is not there. You're not thinking like, oh, am I lit up? Should I be, you're not thinking, should I be feeling this lit up? You're not thinking, oh, does that mean we should go to bed? No, you're not thinking those things. You're just lit up. And then maybe later you think about those things, but in the moment you're lit up, you're just lit up. And if I see how you lit up and you go, I think so, I go, no. I'll never forget the first time. So stories, people like stories. So when I was a little kid, I was sensitive to energy, but I didn't know it, right? And so when I was a little kid growing up in Los Angeles in the mid-60s, so in 1964, in the summer of 1964, I was 8 years old. And, my dad was European, he wasn't into sports and stuff. So I'd never been to a baseball game or anything like that. In fact, I'd probably never been anywhere in my life until that time where there was maybe more than 600 or 700 people in one place. And my parents were friends with another family who did really like baseball. And Los Angeles had a really good professional baseball team at the time, the Dodgers. And one beautiful, warm August night, I was taken to Dodger Stadium. And to me, it was like going to heaven. There was 42,000 people there. I'd never been in the presence of that much energy. And 90% of these were having their intention and their love focused on one thing, the Dodgers. I'd never experienced anything like that. 42,000 people with their heart open and yelling and screaming and loving their Dodgers. And it's like, I was so lit up. I didn't even know what lit up was, but I was so lit up. And of course, many, many, many decades later, I realize now what that was all about. It gave me a taste of what a civilization could be like. If we were being that way. And it was like, I'll never forget that. But I didn't even have the words lit up, but it didn't matter. I was lit up. Every cell was vibrating at a frequency I'd never experienced, with a coherence I'd never experienced. But I didn't have those concepts when I was 8, but it didn't matter. It kept moving in me. It kept moving through me. Even though my conscious mind wasn't with the program at the time, it was still working. Seeds were planted there that could sprout later on in my life, after I had whatever I needed to have and whatever I needed to be, where there was room for that to come to fruition. But there's this great line in the Course in Miracles: nothing real is ever lost. It has to do with true community, your question. It has to do with my example. It has to do with, and the example about the party, and noticing that there's a connection there where you were lit up with that person. If you really want to find your true community, study what lights you up. Study who you light up. Study what I call patterns of nourishment. What really nourishes you, and who do you really nourish? Not who do you want to nourish, who do you wish nourished you, but what people, places, things, ideas, activities really do light you up. But you see, the trap is, like, let's say that I concluded that baseball lights me up. If that was my conclusion, I would suffer. Because what if the commissioner decided to postpone baseball for a year because of COVID? So there was a quality in that night at Dodger Stadium that was not dependent on baseball. But if I wasn't playing the infinite game, I might not put my attention and inquire into what were the qualitative elements that were present that night. Because qualities are eternal.
That's very powerful.
I'm glad I said something.
Meaning I just got it. Yeah, I just understood one of the things that you
just got lit up.
Yeah, and when you said, that you could have concluded that baseball lit you up, that's what helped me get it. Okay, that I could see myself concluding that it was baseball, but now I understand
like I
that
still
I'm
have
missing the quality.
Like I still have sadness come up for me sometimes when I'm doing channel surfing and I get to a baseball game and it doesn't have the same energy anymore. And then that's like getting my hand caught in a cookie jar. But I don't go, I shouldn't have had that happen.
How is that your hand getting caught in the cookie jar?
Because the sadness arose because I was associating the quality with baseball in that moment. Otherwise, I wouldn't be sad.
Are we always sad when we're connected to finite things? Like, isn't sadness also a natural emotion?
There's a difference between what you and I usually call sadness. Like that example would be sadness. There's a difference between that and true mourning. But true mourning is a healing process of letting go of that which you recognize no longer serves you, serves life, okay? And so someone can experience sadness without allowing themselves to mourn, in which case they'll probably just have that over and over and over again, because they won't have inquired deeply enough into what that sadness is really representing, because they can't get to the quality of it.
You know, you just reminded me of, so for example, back to Phoenix Rising, I think there's a some mournfulness that I'm not sure I fully allowed myself to experience.
And this is so important that I have gone through this over the increasingly over the last 30 years, as I've been more and more aware of the magnitude and the ubiquitousness and the depth of what is actually falling apart. And the degree to which myself and other human beings have been completely duped. Yeah, I've gone through scores and scores of waves of mourning. But the difference between that being indulgent and being useful is the understanding that what I'm doing each time is I'm releasing more and more of my limited identifications with these qualities that are so valuable to me. And it when I can do that, it deepens my intimacy with these qualities that are so valuable to me, and it increases my commitment to live my stand of standing for the possibility of a new possibility of being for human beings, where these qualities naturally flourish, like that quality did that night. But you see, that night, it was happening for people, but most of the people had no idea what was really going on. And they go back to the stadium because they want that same aliveness. But maybe it's not there anymore. Maybe the honor has gone out of the game. Maybe that game's been infested by greed. But if you are fixated on the idea that I only get that feeling from being in a baseball stadium, you're going to suffer. Just like, oh, I have to be with her. That's like saying I have to be at that baseball stadium. But you see, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There was something real in a moment with her, but it's not what you think it is. There was a quality, a real quality in that moment. If it was real love, there was a quality. Like, I was thinking about that recently, because the first woman I ever romantically loved in this lifetime was a woman from high school. We were in high school. And I'd known it was real love. It didn't go away. And we reconnected on Facebook a few years ago, and we'd stayed in touch. And so this year's the 50th reunion of our class. And I went through this wide variety of feelings. Part of it was the joy and the bliss of basking in the truth of my love for her and her love for me. Part of her was the mourning that was associated with what could have been, maybe, you know. And so most people don't have a way of being with all of that contributes to them. But I do. And then it's my choice about whether I want to do anything about that. It's my choice about whether I want to say, hey, I'm thinking about going to the reunion, but I only want to go if you're going to go. Are you going to go? I have a choice to say that or not. And because I have a way of being with all that that works over time, it allows me to stay nurtured by the love that's real rather than getting caught up in the thought, oh, what could have been, blah, 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 blah.
What if you didn't feel you had the choice, but you were, being pulled by other emotions and things like that?
So like I said, you're lost if you don't have a way. This is skillful means. You're lost if you don't have a way of being with your emotions, if you don't have a way of being with your thoughts, if you can't examine them, if you're not committed to becoming more aware, if you're not committed to compassionately allowing what it is you become aware of, you're lost. And that's why I teach what I teach, because I teach people ways of being and practices they can do that will begin to allow for the possibility of a new possibility. That's why I'm saying, for most people, if you're locked into ego-based consciousness, getting what you really want is hopeless. And until you realize that, you can't get very far. Because until you get that, everything is just a clever dodge to avoid that. Hopelessness. And you'd be amazed if you look at your life and you look at other people's lives from the possibility that a whole hell of a lot of people's lives are different strategies to avoid being with that feeling of hopelessness. You'd be amazed how much of people's lives are unwittingly dominated by their unconscious commitment to attempt to avoid the feeling of powerlessness and hopelessness. And so anything you do from that place will not work.
And if you do find yourself in that place, is there a prayer or something that you can share with us that we can possibly use to create a space to allow for something else?
Well, for most people in that state, a prayer would be just another clever dodge.
Mm.
I'd rather they do what I'm teaching.
Mm.
But I keep repeating myself.
I find that, so for example, I very much can resonate with using the ego to try to do more, better, different, all right? And at the same time, sometimes I'm very aware of that, and all I have available to me, which I'm grateful for, is asking for guidance and just, that prayer.
It's too vague. You need, if you want to be more powerful, you need to be more specific in your inquiry. What exactly am I thinking? What was the thought that I had the moment before I had that feeling? What body sensation am I having, or did I have right at the moment that I was having that feeling? You're too vague. There's not enough power. There's not enough specificity. You need a laser light instead of an incandescent light. Your inquiry is way too mushy. Way too mushy. You've got to really want to know, like a laser.
So I got to work on the skillful means.
There has to be a commitment to awareness. You have to really want to know. Like, one way to pretend you want to know, but you don't really want to know, is to be vague in your question. The breakdown, we live in a human reality where the breakdowns are very specific. Finding the breakdown is key. Finding the weakest link in the chain is key to restoring the integrity of the chain. You have to really want to find, the weak link in the chain. But most people are afraid to find the weak link in the chain because they're afraid if they find it, they'll like beat themselves up more, or they'll use that as proof that they're not no good, blah, 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 blah. And none of those thoughts will occur to them as thoughts. They'll occur to them like, that's reality. That's how it all fits together. But you keep looking for a solution that you can't find, because your solutions are still a subtle attempt to be a clever dodge to move away from what you don't want. And I don't know how to convince you better than I'm attempting to, that doesn't work. That what works is to completely allow whatever is existing to be there. But that's the last thing the ego would ever do, would ever consider doing. Because the ego's going, if I just accept it, they'll kill me. If I just allow it to be there, they'll take out a gun and shoot me. Where that's a complete confusion of levels. Because if they're going to take out a gun and shoot you, they're going to do it whether you allow it or not. So it's a complete confusion of levels. So, by the time you notice what is, it already is. You can resist what is, but it won't change what is, because what is already is. So you're wasting energy and you're getting entangled in something you don't want to entangle yourself with that already is. So by the time you realize something is, it already has been and is. So spending energy trying to resist what is futile. And it's even worse than futile, because now you're focused on what you don't want, so you're going to get more of it. But I don't seem to be doing a very good job of convincing you of that.
Well, actually, this was a great conversation, Dr. K. There's so many layers to this, and I'm just regularly more aware of how many more layers there are, right? And so I really, really appreciate this opportunity. And I just want to ask you,
imagine if you enjoyed that journey.
Yeah.
Imagine if you enjoyed that journey, because I'm telling you, that journey goes on for a while. You might as well enjoy it. It could be no other way, is what I'm saying. I'm inviting you to see that it could be no other way. That once you stand for a new possibility, everything associated with the old possibilities will come up for you to look at. It could be no other way. It could be no other way. So maybe you'll surrender to it a little bit more when you realize for yourself, and you don't just believe me, that it could be no other way. If you've been a selfish person your whole life, and you've been addicted to this and addicted to that, and you've used people, and now you stand for the possibility of being an uplifter, what do you think you're going to see? It could be no other way. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. Forgive yourself. You didn't know what you were doing. You didn't know what you were being. That's not your destiny. Your past behavior or belief level of consciousness is not your destiny, unless you say it is. So I think this interaction that we've had, because you've played different roles here, which I really appreciate. You're a very big person to play the student and play the interviewer at the same time, and to put your blind spots up on the mat so lovingly for people to see themselves in you is an enormous contribution that you're making, not only to yourself, but to many, many other people, giving themselves permission to go to places that they probably wouldn't have gone without your love and commitment to truth. And do you have anything you want to say in closing? And also, if you can include in your comments, if you have any clear thoughts yet, and if you don't, that's fine too, about where you'd like to take these series of conversations. And then I'll, after that, I'll give my contact information and we can close out the conversation.
Yeah, I sincerely appreciate this opportunity to be with you and to continually learn from you. And, I had a few really big ahas, as I do in most of our conversations. And one of them was when you previously, when I've heard you talk about the hopelessness, I didn't get it in the way that I got it today. And I'm sure there's more to it, but what I got today was that as long as I continue to deal with something through the ego, that's when it's hopeless. Not that it's hopeless, it's that when I'm working through it through that, then it's hopeless. So that was a different distinction than I had previously.
But there's another part of it too, and that is that trying to get away, trying to push ego away is more ego. That's a really important part of the key, is that attempting to get out of the trap is the trap. Instead of just seeing the trap and letting the trap be there and having faith that you are not the trap. Trying to get rid of the trap is a subtle way of resisting the trap. And that's the part you haven't seen yet. Trying to get away from the trap is the trap. I'm going to say it again. Trying to get out of the trap is the trap. Because when you try to get out of the trap, you're implying that you believe the trap is real. Otherwise, why would you try to get out of it? So it's a form of resistance. It's a subtle form of resistance that puts you in a place that isn't your rightful place. Your rightful place is that you are not the trap. You are not ego. That you are, whether ego is doing its thing or not, you are. And you don't have to keep being identified with ego to believe that you're alive, because you are with or without ego. And so I think that's where you haven't let yourself go yet. And so a lot of your actions have been unconsciously more of the trap, believing that you're being spiritual, that you're doing the right thing, but you're doing it subtly to get away from the trap. But if you knew the trap was a complete illusion, you wouldn't spend any energy trying to get away from it. You would just let it be the illusion that it is. And so unwittingly, you're entrapping yourself in the illusion by trying to get out of the trap. So trying to get out of the trap is the trap.
I'm picturing that, the Chinese, that thing that, what I'm talking about, where you put it on your fingers and then the more you pull, you can't pull and it hurts. And yeah, so the Chinese trap. And that's what I continually do from different angles. Though I am grateful though that I have more awareness than I did yesterday, right? And I have more awareness than I did a year ago. And so I'm grateful for having some additional skills. And so, but this is a lifelong journey. So thank you for, being an awesome teacher.
where would you like to take what we're doing? Where would you like to take it from here?
So like, it would be great, like if you would share, like if people wanted to work with you, like how they could reach out to you. But one other thing that I'll share is that, there were a number of things that we talked about in our session today that might be useful things to unpack a little bit more. And instead of just connecting it to Phoenix Rising, connecting it just to life, just pick a few of those things and unpack them to have a different perspective. I think I think that would be beneficial to a lot of people, including myself.
I think that would be beneficial if people had the background of this video and the one before.
Absolutely.
I'm open to that. So we can talk about that later.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to close it out.
Please.
Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to or viewing another episode of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. I'm your host, Dr. David, the Cutting Edge Doc. And here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. Very often I'm interviewing other people. Today was a turnaround episode where my friend and student Karmjit Singh was gracious enough to interview me. The focus of our presentation or talk today was called Phoenix Rising in Motion, where we were building on a prior video called Phoenix Rising that was done in February of 2022 and is up on the David Kamnitzer YouTube channel, as this will be as well, where I presented a model to facilitate our minds to begin to confront certain realities and possibilities that could make a big difference for people. And then today was beginning to flesh that out a little bit so that it landed in terms of the way people are currently experiencing their lives and their particular cares and concerns and motivations and desires. And I think we've laid a groundwork here to do what Karmjit is suggesting. If people will go back and view the first and the second video, we can go into more specific challenges and opportunities that people have in today's world without getting caught up in that trap we were talking about today, about getting so caught up in winning a finite game that you suffer anyway. But there's ways of being very skillful in relation to finite games that can make your life a lot more enjoyable and more effective and contribute to a lot of other people. So, I'm kind of a person that is sort of like a healer's healer, teacher's teacher type person. People that tend to get the most value out of working with me are people who've been on the path for a while and have either reached a plateau or they want a little fire under them to go a little bit faster. I also have a lot of ability and knowledge in the healing arts as well. I do ontological coaching as well. I work with people in person in San Jose, California, and virtually with people all over the world. I can be reached at my email address, which is david.kamnitzer@gmail.com. That's david.kam as in Mary, N as in Nancy, I, T as in Tom, Z as in zebra, ER, david.kamnitzer@gmail.com. And that's a good way to reach me. And with that, I'm done. Is there anything else you want to say?
I just want to thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, so with that, we'll close with love and peace. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.